The air inside the cockpit was suffocating. Alarms blared, their sharp, insistent tones a cacophony of panic that rattled through John Ryder's bones. His hands, slick with sweat, clenched the control stick as he fought to steady the ship, but it was a losing battle. Outside, the vast expanse of stars blurred into streaks of light as the vessel spun out of control, tumbling toward the surface of the alien planet below. The emergency lights flickered, casting the cramped interior of the cockpit in a stuttering red glow. John glanced at the display screens, his heart pounding in his chest. Nothing made sense anymore. His instruments were fried, scrambled beyond recognition by whatever force had pulled them out of hyperspace. The planet below grew larger by the second, a swirling blue orb bathed in a golden halo of light. He had never seen anything like it before, but there was no time for wonder, no room for curiosity. His focus narrowed to a single, desperate thought: survive. With a deep, ragged breath, John pulled hard on the controls, trying to slow the descent. The ship screamed in protest, the hull vibrating so violently that he feared it might tear apart. He was running on instinct now, years of training kicking in, but it felt like trying to steer a comet. The planet's gravity was unforgiving, dragging him down faster and faster. He caught a glimpse of the landscape below, endless stretches of ocean, glimmering with an eerie, unnatural light, no land in sight, just water, as far as his eyes could see, shimmering like molten silver in the planet's strange twilight. The ship was going to hit the water, and it wasn't going to be gentle. The impact came with a deafening crash. His body was thrown forward, the safety harness biting into his chest and shoulders as the vessel slammed into the alien sea. The world outside exploded into white foam and dark water, and for a moment everything was chaos. Metal shrieked as it bent and broke. The sound of rushing water filled his ears as the cockpit shattered and the cold, foreign ocean surged in. John's vision swam. He was weightless, disoriented, tumbling through the wreckage as it was swallowed by the sea. His head struck something hard, a console, maybe, and the pain burst behind his eyes like a supernova. The cold water surged into his mouth, and he choked, the salty taste unlike anything from Earth. His body screamed for oxygen, his muscles burning as he struggled to reach the surface, but his limbs felt heavy, sluggish. He was sinking, being dragged down into the depths by the weight of his ruined ship. Darkness pressed in from all sides, and John's thoughts began to fragment. So this is it, he thought bitterly, his mind drifting as his vision faded. After all the years of exploring distant worlds, all the dangers he'd faced, it would end here, in the silent depths of an alien sea. A nameless grave on a planet no one knew existed. Just as the last flicker of consciousness slipped away, a light appeared. At first he thought it was a hallucination, a trick of his oxygen-starved brain, but the light grew brighter, cutting through the inky darkness of the water. A figure swam toward him, graceful and fast, moving with an otherworldly fluidity. Through the haze of his fading vision, he could make out long, flowing hair, glowing with a soft, ethereal luminescence that shimmered like stardust in the water. A face, pale and beautiful, eyes wide and luminous, locked onto his. His mind barely registered it. It didn't make sense, nothing did. But then he felt something warm and gentle wrap around his arm. The figure pulled him close, and in that instant everything went dark. John awoke with a start, gasping for air. His lungs burned as if he'd just broken the surface after being held underwater for too long. His first instinct was to sit up, but pain shot through his chest and legs, pinning him down. He blinked against the harsh light, his vision blurry, trying to make sense of his surroundings. He was lying on his back, on something soft but unfamiliar. The air was warm, fragrant with the scent of flowers and earth, so different from the sterile atmosphere of his ship. His mind raced, trying to recall what had happened: the crash, the water, the figure in the depths. Was it real, or had he imagined it in his final moments? As his vision cleared, he saw her. She stood a few feet away, kneeling beside a small stream, her hands submerged in the clear, gently flowing water. She was otherworldly, ethereal in a way that made the air around her seem lighter, more delicate. Her skin shimmered faintly in the sunlight, a pale pearlescent hue that shifted with the movement of her body, and her hair, long and flowing, seemed to ripple like water itself, glowing with an inner light. But it was her eyes that held him captive. They were vast, a deep violet that seemed to contain the entire universe, as if galaxies swirled just beneath their surface. The alien girl, if that's what she was, glanced over at him, her expression calm but curious. For a moment, neither of them spoke. John didn't have the words, and even if he did, his throat felt raw, his body heavy with exhaustion. "You are awake," she said softly. Her voice was melodic, like the tinkling of wind chimes in a distant breeze, and yet it carried a weight of ancient knowledge. It wasn't English, but somehow the meaning reached him all the same, as if the words bypassed language altogether. John tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Instead, he nodded, wincing as the motion sent a fresh wave of pain through his body. His hand moved instinctively to his chest, and to his surprise, he felt no wounds. The injuries he had sustained in the crash, the gash on his leg, the bruises from the harness, everything was gone. His skin was smooth, untouched. How his voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. The girl stood gracefully, moving toward him with a fluid elegance that seemed almost unreal. She knelt beside him, and for the first time, John noticed the strange markings on her skin, delicate, intricate patterns that glowed faintly in the fading light. Her fingers brushed his forehead, cool and soothing. "You were dying," she said simply. "I saved you." The words were so matter-of-fact, so devoid of the monumental significance they carried, that John almost didn't process them. But as the meaning sank in, his heart pounded in his chest. He struggled to sit up, ignoring the pain, his mind racing. "You saved me?" he asked, his voice weak but growing stronger. "How? What are you?" The girl tilted her head, her violet eyes narrowing slightly in thought, as if trying to find the simplest way to explain something profound. "I am Elijah," she said at last, "and I carry the gift of life. It is my duty to heal, to protect those in need. It is my people's way." John's mind struggled to grasp the concept. He had heard stories of alien civilizations possessing strange abilities, but to actually witness it firsthand was beyond anything he had imagined. He looked down at himself again, marveling at the absence of any injury, the vitality that had returned to his limbs. "I don't understand," he muttered. "Why would you save me? You don't even know who I am." Elijah's gaze softened, and for the first time, John saw something else in those endless violet eyes, a flicker of emotion, something deeper than the detached calm she had shown so far. "When we save a life, a bond is formed," she explained, her voice quiet but unwavering. "It is our way, a sacred tradition. You are now bound to me, and I to you. This bond is not one we can break." John stared at her, his thoughts spinning. Bound? What did that even mean? He had crash-landed on a strange planet, nearly died, and now he was being told that his life was somehow intertwined with an alien girl he had just met. It was too much to process all at once. "I don't understand," he said again, shaking his head. "I need to get back to my ship, my crew." "There is no ship," Elijah interrupted gently. "Not anymore. The sea has claimed it." Her words struck him like a hammer. The reality of his situation came crashing down on him, heavier than the weight of the water that had nearly drowned him. His ship, his only way off this planet, was gone. His crew, if any of them had survived, was scattered across the galaxy, unreachable. He was stranded. Panic rose in his chest, but before he could spiral further, Elijah placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. There was something in her presence, a calming force that seemed to flow through her fingers and into him, steadying his breath, quieting his mind. "You are not alone," she said softly. "I will help you." John swallowed hard, his throat tight. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond to the kindness she was offering, the overwhelming situation he found himself in. But in that moment, as the golden light of the setting sun bathed them in warmth, he felt the first stirrings of something strange and unfamiliar, a connection, a bond, just as she had described. It terrified him. And yet, deep down, it also gave him hope. The village was unlike anything John had ever seen, a place woven from dreams and ancient stories, standing in stark contrast to the sleek, metallic edges of human civilization. It was nestled among towering trees, their trunks twisted and gnarled, with leaves that shimmered like opal in the light of Valastra's twin suns. Vines, thick and braided, hung from the branches, draping the homes below like curtains of green and gold. The structures were organic, as if grown from the earth itself, with walls made of iridescent stone that seemed to shift colors with the changing light. Despite its beauty, there was an undercurrent of unease that prickled at the edge of John's awareness. Eyes followed him as he walked through the village, alien gazes filled with a mixture of curiosity and caution. He was an outsider here, a stranger in their world, and though no one had said it outright, he could feel the weight of their unspoken judgment pressing down on him. Elysia walked beside him, her movements fluid and graceful, like a breeze gliding over still water. The village parted for her as they passed, the villagers bowing their heads slightly in respect. It was clear that she held a special place here, though John was still struggling to understand the full extent of her importance. He had been on Velastra for 2 days now, but it felt like an eternity. His mind reeled from everything that had happened: the crash, the rescue, the revelation of this strange bond that now tied him to Elysia. He had spent most of the first day in a daze, trying to process the enormity of his situation, but now the questions gnawed at him relentlessly. As they reached the edge of the village, where a small grove of luminescent trees cast a soft glow over the ground, John finally broke the silence. "I need to understand," he said, his voice low but steady. "What is this bond you keep talking about? What does it mean for me? For us?" Elysia paused, her violet eyes studying him with a quiet intensity. For a long moment she said nothing, as if searching for the right words. Then, with a soft sigh, she gestured for him to follow her deeper into the grove. They walked in silence, the only sound the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. The air was cool here, the faint scent of something floral lingering on the wind. After a few minutes, they came to a small clearing, where a crystalline pool of water shimmered under the light of the twin suns. Elysia knelt beside the water's edge, and John followed suit, sitting down beside her. "The bond," she began, her voice soft but firm, "is more than just a connection between us. It is ancient, rooted in the traditions of my people, and it carries a weight that I do not expect you to fully understand yet." She dipped her hand into the pool, watching as ripples spread across the surface. When someone with the gift of life saves another, a bond is formed, a sacred thread that ties their fates together. This bond is not simply a promise or a responsibility. It is a merging of spirits, a link that transcends time and space. You are now a part of me, as I am a part of you. John frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "But why? I didn't ask for this. I didn't even know your people existed before I crashed here." Elysia smiled gently, her eyes reflecting the light of the water. "No one asks for the bond. It is not something that can be chosen or refused. It simply is. My people believe that when a life is saved, it is not by chance, but by destiny. The bond is the universe's way of ensuring that both lives remain intertwined, that they share a common path." John shifted uncomfortably. The idea of destiny, of some cosmic force tying him to this world, was difficult for him to accept. He had always believed in reason, in logic, in the power of human ingenuity to shape the future. But here, on this alien planet, everything felt different. It was as if the very air he breathed carried the weight of ancient traditions and unseen forces. "And what does this bond mean for us?" Practically, he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "What happens now?" Elysia's expression grew more serious, and she turned to face him fully. "The bond is not without its consequences, John. You are now tied to this world, to me. The bond must be honored, or it will grow unstable, and that instability can have dangerous effects." "Dangerous," John echoed, his heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" "If the bond is broken or neglected, it can bring imbalance," Elysia explained, her voice heavy with the weight of experience. "It is rare, but there have been cases where those who ignored the bond suffered greatly. Illness, madness, even death. The bond is a living thing, in a way, and it demands care." John felt a chill run down his spine. "And how am I supposed to honor this bond?" he asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Elysia hesitated for a moment before answering. "In our culture, the bond between a life giver and the one they save is considered sacred. It must be nurtured, strengthened through shared experiences, through understanding and connection. And eventually, it is expected that the two will bring forth new life, a child who will carry the strength of both their bloodlines." John stared at her, his mind reeling. "A child," he whispered, barely able to process the word. Elysia nodded, her gaze steady. "Yes, it is the ultimate expression of the bond, the merging of two lives to create a new one. The child will inherit the gifts of both parents, human and Velastran, and in doing so will become a bridge between our worlds. John's thoughts spiraled out of control. He had crash-landed on an alien planet, been saved by a woman with mysterious powers, and now he was being told that he was destined to father a child with her? It was too much. His mind couldn't wrap around the enormity of it. "I didn't ask for this," he said again, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't ask to be saved. I didn't ask to be bound to you. I just want to find a way back home." Alicia's expression softened, and for the first time, John saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "I know," she said quietly. "I do not expect you to embrace this easily. You come from a different world with different beliefs. But the bond is not something we can control. It is part of who we are now." John stood up abruptly, pacing along the edge of the pool, his hands running through his hair in frustration. "There has to be a way to break it," he muttered. "There has to be some way out of this." Alicia rose to her feet, her eyes following his every movement. "There is no way to break the bond without consequences, John. You must understand that. It is not a punishment, nor is it a trap. It is simply the way of things." Her calm, measured tone only made John feel more trapped. He turned to her, his voice rising in desperation. "But I didn't choose this. I never agreed to." Before he could finish, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over him, and he stumbled, clutching his head as a sharp pain shot through his temples. His vision blurred, and his knees buckled beneath him. Alicia was at his side in an instant, catching him before he fell. "John," she exclaimed, her voice filled with concern. "The bond, it's reacting to your resistance. You're fighting it." John gasped for breath, his chest tight with pain. It felt as if something inside him was pulling in two directions, stretching him to the breaking point. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the pain, but it only intensified. "I can't breathe," he choked out. Alicia pressed her hand to his chest, and instantly, a soothing warmth spread through his body, calming the storm inside him. The pain ebbed, leaving him weak and trembling, but no longer on the edge of collapse. He opened his eyes and saw Alicia's face close to his, her expression filled with a mix of fear and determination. "You mustn't fight it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "If you push too hard, the bond will break you. Please, John, let me help you." John's breath came in ragged gasps, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to scream, to rail against this invisible force that was pulling him in directions he didn't want to go. But as he looked into Alicia's eyes, he saw the truth of her words. There was no escape. No way to sever the bond without destroying himself in the process. Slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. Alicia sighed in relief, her hand still resting gently on his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "I know this is difficult, but you are not alone in this. I will be with you every step of the way." John closed his eyes, leaning back against the smooth bark of a nearby tree. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions: fear, frustration, confusion, but beneath it all, there was something else, something deeper. A flicker of connection, of understanding, that he hadn't felt before. The bond. He didn't fully understand it yet, but he could feel it now, a presence just beneath the surface of his consciousness. It wasn't intrusive, but it was there, a thread that tied him to Alicia in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. "What now?" he asked quietly, opening his eyes to look at her. Alicia stood and offered him her hand, her expression gentle but resolute. "Now," she said, "we begin the journey of understanding, together." Over the next several days, John found himself immersed in the world of Velastra in ways he had never imagined. Alicia guided him through the village, introducing him to the people, showing him the customs and traditions that shaped their lives. He learned that Velastran society was built on a foundation of balance. Each person possessed a unique gift tied to the elements of the planet. Some could command the waters, others the winds, while still others could commune with the creatures that roamed the vast forests. But Alicia's gift, the gift of life, was the most revered of all. Her ancestors had been the healers, the protectors of the village, entrusted with the sacred duty of preserving life in all its forms. The bond that was created when a life was saved was considered a blessing, a merging of souls that was meant to be cherished and honored. To break the bond was seen as a violation of the natural order, a betrayal of the very essence of life itself. As John listened to these stories, he began to understand the enormity of what had happened to him. This wasn't just about him or Alicia, it was about something far greater, something that tied him to the planet itself. And as much as he wanted to resist, as much as he longed for his old life, he couldn't shake the feeling that his fate was no longer his own. Each night, as the twin moons rose in the sky, casting their pale light over the village, John would sit with Elysia by the crystalline pool, the two of them speaking in quiet tones about their worlds, their histories, their hopes and fears. The more time they spent together, the stronger the bond became, and John found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't expected. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable. There was a grace to her, a quiet strength that calmed the chaos inside him. She never pushed him, never demanded anything of him, but she was always there, steady and patient, guiding him through the storm of emotions that raged within. One evening, as they sat together under the glow of the moons, Elysia spoke of the future. "Our bond is still new," she said softly, her eyes reflecting the light of the water. "But in time it will grow, and with it so will the connection between us. There is much we must learn from each other, much we must face together." John stared at the rippling surface of the pool, his thoughts heavy. "And the child?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Is that inevitable?" Elysia's gaze softened, and she reached out to take his hand. "Nothing is inevitable," she said gently. "The bond will guide us, but it does not force our hand. The choice, in the end, is ours." John looked at her, his heart conflicted. He still didn't know what the future held, but as he felt the warmth of her hand in his, he realized that maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward, one that didn't have to be shaped by fear or resistance. Perhaps in time he could learn to embrace the bond, not as a burden but as a gift. As the night deepened and the stars shimmered in the sky above, John and Elysia sat in silence, their hands still entwined. And for the first time since his arrival on Velastra, John felt a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. Hope. The days on Velastra unfolded with a steady rhythm, marked by the rise and fall of the planet's twin suns and the subtle shifting hues of the sky, which bled from gold to violet as the hours passed. For John, it was a strange new existence, both peaceful and disorienting. The technological hum of Earth, the constant urgency of human life, felt a world away, replaced by the soft whispers of alien winds in the quiet, purposeful lives of the Velastran people. But amidst the strangeness, something unexpected was beginning to take root. John had stopped counting the days since the crash. The urgency to leave, to find a way back home, had been replaced by something more pressing: the need to understand. Not just this new world, but his place in it. His connection to Elysia, the bond that tied them together, was no longer something he could ignore. It had woven itself into the fabric of his thoughts, his emotions, his very existence. Every morning he would wake with the weight of it pressing softly against his mind, a constant, quiet presence that never left him. At first it had unnerved him. It felt intrusive, like a thread constantly tugging at his consciousness, reminding him that his life was no longer entirely his own. But over time the bond became familiar. Elysia had shown him how to attune himself to it, how to let it guide his emotions rather than fight against it. And in doing so, John found that the bond wasn't a prison, as he had once feared. It was a bridge. A connection between them that transcended words, an invisible current flowing between their souls. As the bond deepened, so did his feelings for her. They spent most days together, exploring the lush, vibrant landscape of Velastra. The planet was a marvel, filled with strange, bioluminescent forests that glowed with soft, pulsing light at night, and rolling fields of grass that shimmered with iridescent colors under the suns. Elysia would guide him through the forests, her movements graceful and sure, her knowledge of the land vast. She showed him hidden waterfalls where the water sparkled like liquid glass, and ancient ruins overgrown with vines, their purpose long forgotten by time. One afternoon, as they stood at the edge of a towering cliff overlooking the vast ocean, John found himself marveling at how different this world was from Earth. The waves below shimmered in colors that no human language could name, a kaleidoscope of hues that shifted with the movement of the tides. Strange, bird-like creatures soared above, their wings glinting in the sunlight. "It's beautiful," John said quietly, his voice filled with awe. He turned to look at Elysia, who stood beside him, her gaze focused on the horizon. "It is," she agreed, her voice soft. "Velastra is alive in ways most cannot understand. Every part of it, every tree, every drop of water, carries the energy of life. We are all connected to each other, to the land, to the stars above." John nodded, his mind filled with the weight of her words. He had always known that Velastra was different from anything he had ever encountered, but the more time he spent here, the more he began to see the subtle ways the planet and its people were connected. It wasn't just about survival, it was about harmony, balance. And yet, despite the beauty and peace of Velastra, there was a tension within him that he couldn't fully shake. The pull between two worlds, the life he had known and the life he was beginning to imagine, tore at him, tugging in opposite directions. Part of him still longed for the familiar comforts of Earth, for the certainty of human existence. But another part of him, a growing part, felt drawn to this place, to her. He glanced at Elysia again, his eyes tracing the delicate lines of her face. Her hair, long and flowing, seemed to shimmer with an ethereal glow in the fading light of the suns. Her skin was luminous, almost translucent, and the intricate markings that adorned her arms and neck patterns that shifted and glowed like liquid light captivated him. But it was her eyes that held him the most. Those deep, violet eyes which seemed to see right through him, as if she could read every thought, every emotion he had ever tried to hide. "Do you ever wonder about my world?" he asked suddenly, the question slipping out before he could stop it. "About Earth?" Elysia's gaze shifted to him, her expression thoughtful. "I do," she said after a moment. "I wonder what it is like to live in a place so disconnected from the energy of life. I wonder how your people survive without the gifts we have here." John chuckled softly. "We manage, though sometimes it feels like we're just stumbling around in the dark, trying to figure it all out." "Your people are resilient," Elysia said, her tone respectful. "You adapt. That is a gift in itself." There was a pause, a moment of silence where the only sound was the distant crash of the waves against the rocks below. John turned back to the ocean, his mind filled with 1,000 unspoken thoughts. "I think I miss it," he admitted quietly. "Not the chaos, not the noise, but the people. My crew, my family. It's strange being here, knowing I may never see them again." Elysia's hand touched his arm, and the warmth of her touch spread through him like a gentle current. "You do not have to forget where you came from," she said softly. "The bond does not erase who you are. It only adds to it." John closed his eyes, letting her words sink in. It was easy to lose himself in the beauty of Velastra, in the peace it offered, but the thought of never returning to Earth, of never seeing the people he loved again, weighed heavily on him. And yet, he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward this world, toward Elysia. "I don't know what the future holds," John said after a long pause, "but I do know that I can't leave. Not yet." Elysia smiled, her expression serene. "The future is always uncertain, John. But here, in this moment, we are exactly where we are meant to be." As the days passed, their bond continued to grow. John found himself spending more and more time with Elysia, drawn to her in ways that went beyond the mystical connection they shared. There was something about her presence, something calming and grounding, that soothed the restlessness inside him. She was patient, kind, and wise beyond her years, and the more they talked, the more he realized how little he had understood about this world. One evening, as the twin moons rose high in the sky, casting their silvery light over the village, Elysia led John to a secluded glade deep in the forest. The trees here were ancient, their trunks thick and twisted, their leaves glowing softly in the moonlight. At the center of the glade was a large, flat stone, smooth and polished, surrounded by small, delicate flowers that emitted a faint, pulsing glow. "This place is sacred to my people," Elysia explained as they approached the stone. "It is where we come to commune with the spirits of the land, to seek guidance and clarity." John looked around, feeling the weight of the place, the stillness that seemed to hang in the air. There was a power here, an energy that thrummed beneath the surface of the earth, subtle but undeniable. It reminded him of the bond he shared with Elysia, that invisible thread that tied them together. Elysia sat on the stone, motioning for John to join her. He hesitated for a moment, then lowered himself beside her, feeling the cool surface of the stone beneath his hands. "Close your eyes," Elysia said softly. "Listen to the land, feel its energy." John obeyed, closing his eyes and focusing on the sounds around him, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant call of creatures in the forest, the soft hum of the flowers that surrounded them. Slowly, he felt the tension in his body begin to melt away, replaced by a sense of calm that was almost overwhelming. It is here, in places like this, That we find balance, Alicia continued, her voice barely above a whisper. The bond between us is part of that balance. It is a gift, not a burden. John let out a slow breath, his mind quieting as he listened to her words. For so long he had fought against the bond, resisted the idea that his life could be tied to someone else's in such a profound way. But now, sitting here in the stillness of the glade, he realized that the bond wasn't something to be feared. It was a connection, yes, one that was powerful and unbreakable, but it wasn't a prison. It was comforting. Without thinking, John reached out and took Alicia's hand. Her fingers were cool and soft, and as their hands intertwined, he felt a warmth spread through him, like the sun breaking through clouds after a long storm. Alicia turned to look at him, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the air between them thick with unspoken emotions. Then, slowly she leaned closer, her breath warm against his skin. "John," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest, and in that moment, everything else faded away, the weight of his past, the uncertainty of the future. All that mattered was her, the bond, the connection they shared. And then, without another word, she kissed him. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but there was a depth to it, a slow burning intensity that took John by surprise. He felt the bond between them flare to life, the invisible thread that tied their souls together pulsing with energy. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer, and she responded in kind, her arms wrapping around his neck as the kiss deepened. For a long moment they stayed like that, lost in each other, the world around them forgotten. The bond, once a distant hum in the back of his mind, now surged through him like a river, carrying with it emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Desire, affection, love. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. John could feel his heart racing, could feel the steady beat of Alicia's pulse beneath his fingertips. Her eyes were half closed, her lips slightly parted, and in that moment she looked more beautiful than he had ever imagined. "Alicia," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what this means, but You don't have to know," she interrupted gently, placing a finger to his lips. "Not yet. For now, just be here, with me." John nodded, his throat tight. He didn't have the words to express what he was feeling, didn't know how to put into words the complex, overwhelming emotions that were coursing through him. But as he held her close, as he felt the steady warmth of her body against his, he realized that, for the first time since the crash, he wasn't afraid of the bond. He was grateful for it. The days that followed were different. The bond between John and Alicia had shifted, deepened in ways that were both thrilling and terrifying. They were no longer just companions, no longer just bound by fate, they were something more. Something neither of them fully understood yet, but both felt deeply. John found himself looking forward to each new day, to the quiet moments he spent with Alicia, whether they were walking through the forest or sitting by the crystal-clear streams that wound through the village. The weight of the bond, once a burden he had tried to escape, now felt like an anchor, grounding him in this new life, in her. But with that closeness came a growing sense of responsibility. The bond wasn't just about him and Alicia, it was about the future. About the child they were destined to bring into the world, the child who would carry the legacy of both their worlds. And while John wasn't ready to face that future yet, he could feel it looming on the horizon, like a storm cloud gathering in the distance. One evening, as they sat by the fire in Alicia's home, a simple, yet beautiful structure woven from vines and stone, John voiced the thoughts that had been swirling in his mind for days. "What happens next?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. "With us, with the bond." Alicia looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "The bond will continue to grow," she said softly. "And with it, so will our connection. But the path forward is not set in stone. We have choices, John. We can decide how we walk this path together." John nodded, though the weight of those choices pressed heavily on him. "And the child?" he asked, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "Is that something we're supposed to decide, or is it part of the bond?" Alicia's gaze softened, and she reached out to take his hand, her touch gentle. "The child is a part of the bond, yes," she said quietly. "But it is also a part of us, a part of our love, our connection. It is not something to fear, John. It is a gift." John swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. A gift. The idea of bringing a child into this world, of creating something so profound, was both terrifying and exhilarating. But as he looked into Elysia's eyes, saw the calm certainty in her gaze, he felt the first stirrings of acceptance. Maybe, just maybe, this was his destiny after all. As the fire crackled softly beside them, and the night deepened around their quiet village, John leaned in and kissed her once more, his heart filled with a strange and beautiful mix of hope and fear. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in his life he wasn't running from it. He was ready to face it. The peace that John had come to cherish on Velastra, the slow rhythm of life that had eased his once turbulent mind, was beginning to fray at the edges. There was a tension in the air, subtle but undeniable, like the quiet moments before a storm. He could feel it in the glances of the villagers, quick, furtive looks that lingered just a moment too long. He could hear it in their conversations, hushed voices that fell silent whenever he approached. Something was brewing, something dark and unfamiliar. At first he told himself it was nothing. He had been an outsider from the moment he arrived, a stranger who didn't belong in this place, in this life. Of course the villagers were cautious. Of course they would be hesitant to accept him, especially now that the bond between him and Elysia was no longer a secret. Their relationship, once private and personal, had become a subject of quiet speculation, of whispered discussions in the corners of the village. But it wasn't just curiosity anymore. There was something else, something sharper, more dangerous. John noticed it most in the eyes of Ralek, one of the village's elders. Ralek had always been reserved, his demeanor formal and distant, but lately his gaze had taken on a new edge, one that sent a chill down John's spine. There was suspicion there, and something darker, an unspoken accusation that hung in the air between them like a shadow. It was on one such day, when the twin suns were high in the sky, their light casting long, dappled shadows through the trees, that John first confronted the reality of what was happening. He had been working in the gardens with Elysia, helping to gather the vibrant, shimmering herbs that grew in abundance around the village. The task had become a daily ritual for them, a way to spend time together amidst the calm beauty of Velastra. But that day, as they worked side by side, Elysia's usual light-hearted conversation was absent. She was quiet, her movements slower, more deliberate. Her eyes, usually so full of warmth, were clouded with something he couldn't quite place. "Something's wrong," John said finally, breaking the silence. He set down the basket he had been filling and turned to face her. "I can feel it. You're not yourself." Elysia hesitated, her hands stilling in the midst of pulling a delicate flower from the soil. She didn't meet his gaze right away, her eyes focused on the ground as if searching for the right words. "It's nothing," she said softly, though her voice lacked conviction. John frowned, stepping closer. "Don't do that. Don't shut me out. If something's happening, I need to know." Elysia sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly as she set the flower aside. When she finally looked up at him, there was a flicker of sadness in her eyes, a deep, ancient sorrow that seemed to weigh heavily on her soul. "There are those in the village who fear the bond," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "They fear what it means for us, for the future." John's brow furrowed. "Fear the bond? Why? It's part of your culture, isn't it? You told me it's sacred." "It is," Elysia agreed, her gaze distant. "But there are some who believe that our bond is different, that it threatens the balance." John stared at her, confusion and frustration warring within him. How could it threaten anything? The bond is supposed to bring life, not destroy it. Elysia's expression tightened, and for the first time, John saw the depth of her own internal struggle. "John, you're not from here. You're not Velastran. The bond between us, between a human and someone with the gift of life, has never happened before. It's unprecedented, and that makes people uneasy." John's heart sank. He had known, on some level, that his presence in this world was an anomaly, that his connection to Elysia was something outside the norm. But to hear her say it aloud, to hear the fear in her voice, made the reality of their situation all the more stark. "They think we're a threat," John said, slowly, the realization dawning on him with a cold, sinking certainty. Elysia nodded, her gaze flickering with a pain that mirrored his own. "There are those who believe that our bond could disrupt the natural order. that the child we may one day bring into the world will carry powers that could upset the balance. John felt the weight of her words settle heavily in his chest. He had heard whispers of the prophecy, the ancient tales that spoke of a child born of two worlds, a child with the potential to bring either salvation or ruin. He had dismissed them as folklore, the kind of stories that every culture carried, stories meant to inspire hope or warn of danger. But now, standing here with Elijah, he realized that the prophecy was not just a story to these people. It was a warning, and to some it was a very real threat. "What do we do?" John asked, his voice rough with the weight of the question. Elijah looked away, her eyes scanning the horizon as if seeking answers in the distant trees. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have spent my entire life honoring the gift of life, protecting those in need, healing the wounded. I have always believed in the bond, in its power to unite and strengthen. But now—" Her voice trailed off, and John could see the uncertainty that had been gnawing at her, the doubts that had taken root in her heart. It pained him to see her like this, to see the woman who had always seemed so sure of her path now questioning the very foundation of her existence. "They won't hurt us, will they?" John asked, though even as he spoke the words, he wasn't sure he believed them. Elijah's expression darkened, and for the first time, John saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. "I don't know. There are some who have begun to speak openly against us. They believe that by severing the bond, they can prevent the prophecy from coming true." John's blood ran cold. Sever the bond? How? "There are ways," Elijah said quietly, her voice laced with sorrow, "but they are dangerous. And if the bond is broken forcibly, the consequences could be catastrophic." John's mind raced. The bond, the connection between him and Elijah, wasn't just a physical or emotional link. It was something deeper, something tied to the very essence of their beings. To break it, to sever that connection, would be like tearing apart the fabric of their souls. The thought of it filled him with a deep, gnawing dread. "We can't let that happen," John said firmly, stepping closer to her. "We can't let them do this." Elijah looked up at him, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "I won't let them. But we must be careful. There are those who will stop at nothing to prevent our bond from continuing, and I fear that Rallick may be one of them." John's jaw clenched at the mention of the elder's name. Rallick had always struck him as a man of strict tradition, someone who clung fiercely to the old ways. But John hadn't realized just how deep that rigidity ran, how far Rallick was willing to go to preserve what he believed was the natural order. "If Rallick is against us, then we're going to need help," John said. "Is there anyone we can trust?" Elijah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "There are some who still believe in the power of the bond. The village is divided. Not everyone fears the prophecy. But we must tread carefully. Even those who support us are wary." John's heart pounded in his chest. The weight of their situation was pressing down on him, the enormity of what they were facing becoming clearer by the moment. They weren't just fighting for their own future, they were fighting for the future of their child, for the very survival of the bond itself. "We'll find a way," John said, his voice firm with resolve. "We'll protect the bond. We'll protect each other." Elijah smiled faintly, though there was a sadness in her eyes. "Thank you, John," she whispered. "I don't know what I would do without you." John reached out, pulling her into his arms, holding her close. The warmth of her body, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest, gave him strength. The bond, that invisible thread that tied them together, pulsed gently in the back of his mind, a reminder of the connection they shared. No matter what happened, they would face it together. The following days were tense, filled with quiet conversations and careful glances. John and Elijah began to gather allies, those within the village who still believed in the sanctity of the bond. Some were hesitant, afraid of what the future might hold, but others were more vocal in their support, standing with John and Elijah despite the growing fear. But the whispers of dissent grew louder. It was during one such gathering that the first sign of open conflict emerged. John and Elijah had been meeting with a small group of villagers in the quiet solitude of the forest, discussing how they could protect themselves and the bond, when a sudden, sharp sound cut through the air. It was the unmistakable crack of wood breaking, followed by the rustling of leaves and the heavy footsteps of someone approaching. John's heart raced as he turned toward the source of the noise, his hand instinctively reaching for Elijah. She stood beside him, her expression calm but alert, her eyes scanning the trees. A moment later, Rallick emerged from the shadows. The elder's face was hard, his eyes cold as they locked onto John. Behind him stood several other villagers, their expressions unreadable but tense. They were armed, carrying simple weapons, spears and knives, but their presence alone was enough to send a chill down John's spine. Rallick, Elijah said quietly, stepping forward. "What is this?" Rallick's gaze shifted to her, and for a moment there was something almost mournful in his eyes. "Elijah," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I wish it had not come to this, but you have forced our hand." John stepped forward, placing himself between Elijah and the elder. "Forced your hand? What are you talking about?" Rallick's expression hardened. "The bond between you and Elijah. It is unnatural. It threatens the balance of our world. The prophecy speaks of a child born of two worlds, a child with the power to either save or destroy. We cannot risk that destruction." John's jaw clenched. "You don't know that the prophecy means destruction. It could mean something else, something good." Rallick shook his head. "We cannot take that chance. The bond must be severed, for the good of us all." John's heart pounded in his chest. "You can't do that. You don't understand what you're asking. If you break the bond—" "Enough," Rallick interrupted, his voice sharp. "I understand more than you realize, human. The bond is a dangerous thing, and it has already begun to cloud your judgment. You are not one of us. You do not belong here." John opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, Elijah stepped forward, her voice calm but filled with quiet strength. "Rallick," she said, her tone measured, "the bond between us is not a threat. It is a gift, a union of two worlds. I have honored the gift of life all my days. I will not let you twist its meaning to suit your fears." Rallick's expression darkened, and for a long moment, the two of them stood in silence, the tension between them thick enough to cut. Finally, Rallick spoke, his voice low and cold. "Then you leave me no choice." With a swift motion, Rallick raised his hand, and the villagers behind him stepped forward, their weapons drawn. John's pulse quickened, and he instinctively reached for Elijah, pulling her behind him. "We're not going to let you do this," he said, his voice filled with quiet fury. Rallick's eyes flickered with something dark, determination, perhaps, or fear. "You cannot stop us, John Ryder. The bond will be severed, one way or another." The tension broke like a snapped wire, and in an instant, chaos erupted. The villagers surged forward, their movements swift and practiced. John barely had time to react before one of them was upon him, swinging a spear toward his head. He ducked, narrowly avoiding the blow, and lashed out with his fist, catching the villager in the side of the face. The man stumbled back, but another took his place, brandishing a knife. John's heart raced as he fought to defend himself, his mind scrambling to process what was happening. He had never been in a fight like this before, never had to face down people who were so intent on harm. But as he blocked another strike, his thoughts kept circling back to one thing. Elijah. He had to protect her, no matter what. Through the chaos, he caught a glimpse of her, her face calm but focused, her hands raised as she channeled the energy of the bond. He could feel it, the power of the gift of life, flowing through her, radiating outward like a protective shield. She wasn't fighting, not in the way the villagers were, but she was defending, using her gift to keep them at bay. But John knew it wouldn't last forever. They were outnumbered, and the villagers' determination was fierce. If they didn't find a way to stop this, to end it before it spiraled further, the bond would be in real danger. John ducked another blow, his mind racing. He had to think of something, anything that could turn the tide. And then, through the haze of the fight, an idea formed. It was desperate, reckless, but it might just work. "Elijah," he shouted, his voice barely carrying over the noise. "Trust me." She glanced at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and trust. John didn't have time to explain. He lunged toward one of the villagers, grabbing the man's knife-wielding hand and twisting it away. With a sharp motion, he knocked the weapon from the villager's grip and shoved him backward, buying a few precious seconds. Then, without hesitation, John turned and grabbed Elijah's hand. "We're leaving," he said, his voice breathless but determined. Elijah didn't argue. With a swift nod, she turned and followed his lead as they broke into a sprint, weaving through the trees and into the depths of the forest. The sound of the villagers' shouts faded behind them as they ran, the shadows of the trees closing in around them. They didn't stop until they were deep within the heart of the forest, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and leaves. Only then did John finally slow, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. Elijah came to a stop beside him, her own breath ragged but controlled. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and fear. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. John didn't have an answer. He didn't know what came next. All he knew was that they had escaped for now. But the threat was far from over. Raylick and his followers wouldn't stop. They would come for the bond again. And next time, they might not be so lucky. "We have to find a way to stop them," John said quietly, his mind racing. "We have to protect the bond, protect our future." Elijah nodded, her expression solemn. "We will. Together." John reached out and took her hand, squeezing it tightly. The bond pulsed gently between them, a steady reminder of the connection they shared. No matter what happened, no matter what dangers lay ahead, they would face it together. And somehow they would find a way to survive the coming storm. The quiet of the forest was deceptive. Beneath the calm rustling of leaves and the soft glow of Valastra's twin moons, a storm was brewing, a storm that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with the bond between John and Elijah. They had fled from Raylick's attack, but the elder's influence over the village ran deep. The fear he had sown had already taken root, spreading like a wildfire through the hearts and minds of the Valastran people. And now, as they crouched in the shadows of the towering trees, John and Elijah were alone in more ways than one. "We can't run forever," John said, his voice low and steady, though inside he felt anything but calm. His muscles were still tight with the adrenaline from their escape, and every sound in the forest seemed amplified: the crack of a twig, the distant call of some nocturnal creature, the soft murmur of wind through the trees. Every noise felt like a warning. "I know," Elijah replied, her voice as soft as the wind but resolute. She sat beside him on the damp forest floor, her luminous eyes reflecting the pale moonlight. Even in their fear, even with danger pressing down on them, there was an ethereal beauty to her, something that seemed to make the world around her gentler, softer. But now that gentleness was tempered with determination. "We must confront Raylick. We must convince the others that the bond is not something to fear." John turned to look at her, the weight of their situation settling like a heavy stone in his chest. "How do we do that? Raylick's already convinced half the village that we're dangerous." "The prophecy." "The prophecy is misunderstood," Elijah interrupted, her voice firm. "It has been twisted to fit Raylick's fears. The child spoken of in the prophecy, our child, is not a harbinger of destruction. It is a symbol of unity, a bridge between worlds." John's throat tightened at her words. Our child. The reality of it, of what their bond meant, was something he hadn't fully grasped until now. They hadn't yet conceived the child, but the very idea had taken root between them, woven into the fabric of their bond. It wasn't just about him and Elijah anymore. Their future was bound to the future of Valastra itself. "Do you really believe that," John asked, his voice barely above a whisper, "that our child could unite these people?" Elijah turned to him, her eyes filled with a fierce, unshakable conviction. "Yes," she said simply, "I do." There was a pause, and for a moment, John found himself lost in her gaze. Despite everything, despite the fear and the uncertainty that gnawed at him, there was something about her that made him believe, made him want to believe that they could find a way through this. Together. "We can't convince the village by talking," John said finally, breaking the silence. "Raylick's not going to let us just walk back in and plead our case. He's already made up his mind." Elijah nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "You're right. Words won't be enough." She looked down at her hands, pale and delicate, but filled with the power of the gift of life. "But the bond, our bond, has power beyond words. If we can show them, truly show them, what the bond means, what it is capable of, then maybe they will understand." John frowned, unsure of what she meant. Show them how? Elijah met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Through the child." The words hit John like a punch to the gut. "The child. But we haven't—" "No," Elijah interrupted gently. "Not yet. But the bond between us is already strong. strong enough, I think, to manifest something that will help them see. John's confusion deepened. Manifest what? Alicia took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving his. The child's potential, a glimpse of what our union can create. It will not be the child itself, not yet, but a vision, a symbol, something they can see, feel, understand. John's heart raced. He didn't fully understand what she was saying, but the intensity in her gaze told him that this was more than just a simple display of power. This was something far deeper, far more dangerous. Is that even possible, he asked, his voice laced with doubt. I've never seen anything like that before. Alicia smiled faintly. The bond is stronger than you realize, John. It ties us together in ways even I don't fully understand. But I believe that if we focus, if we trust in the bond, we can show them what they need to see. John hesitated, the weight of her words pressing down on him. This was uncharted territory, a step into the unknown. But then again, ever since he had crash-landed on Velastra, his entire life had been uncharted. He had survived that crash. He had survived the ocean. He had survived the bond. Maybe, just maybe, he could survive this too. All right, he said finally, his voice steady. Let's do it. They made their way back to the village under the cover of night, the path illuminated only by the soft glow of the trees and the light of the twin moons. The village, normally so peaceful, seemed different now. There was an undercurrent of tension in the air, an unease that John could feel as they approached. When they reached the edge of the village, they were greeted by a group of villagers, Ralik's followers, standing guard. Their expressions were grim, their weapons at the ready, but they made no move to attack. Instead, they simply watched as John and Alicia stepped forward, their eyes filled with suspicion. We've come to speak with Ralik, Alicia said calmly, her voice carrying through the still night air. One of the guards, a tall man with sharp features, stepped forward. Ralik doesn't want to hear anything you have to say, he said coldly. You should leave before things get worse. John's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. We're not here to fight, he said, his voice firm but measured. We're here to show you the truth, to show you what the bond really is. The man sneered. The bond is dangerous. We've all seen what it can do. You haven't seen anything yet, Alicia said quietly, stepping forward. But you will. Before the guard could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows. Ralik. The elder's face was hard, his eyes cold as they swept over John and Alicia. You shouldn't have come back, he said, his voice filled with quiet menace. You've already caused enough damage. We haven't caused anything, John shot back. You're the one twisting the prophecy, using it to justify your own fears. Ralik's eyes narrowed. The prophecy is clear. The child born of your bond will bring destruction. We cannot allow that to happen. Alicia stepped forward, her voice calm but filled with strength. You're wrong, Ralik. The prophecy speaks of a child who will bring change, not destruction. But that change doesn't have to be feared. It can be embraced. Ralik's lip curled in disdain. You are blinded by your bond, Alicia. You cannot see the truth. Then let me show you, Alicia said softly. Ralik's eyes flickered with confusion, but before he could respond, Alicia reached out and took John's hand. The moment their hands touched, John felt a surge of energy flow through him, a warmth that spread from his chest and radiated outward. The bond, always present in the back of his mind, flared to life, pulsing with a strength that took his breath away. Close your eyes, Alicia whispered, her voice filled with quiet intensity. Focus on the bond. Focus on the life we will create. John did as she asked, closing his eyes and focusing on the connection between them. At first, it was just a faint hum, a gentle tug in the back of his mind, but as he concentrated, as he allowed himself to fully open to the bond, he felt it grow stronger. It was as if the thread that connected them had become a river, flowing with a force that was both exhilarating and terrifying. And then something shifted. He could feel it, something new, something powerful taking shape between them. It wasn't the child, not yet, but it was a presence, a potential, the very essence of what their union could create. When he opened his eyes, the air around them was shimmering, filled with a soft, golden light. The villagers, who had been watching warily, gasped in awe as the light grew brighter, swirling around John and Alicia like a living thing. And then, in the center of the light, a figure appeared. It was small, barely more than a shape, but it was undeniably there, a vision of a child, suspended in the air between them. The figure was translucent, glowing with the same golden light that surrounded them, but it was clear enough to see the features. A face, delicate and perfect, eyes that shimmered with both human and Velastran traits, a symbol of both worlds, united in one form. The villagers stared in stunned silence, their eyes wide with wonder and fear. "This is what the bond will create," Alicia said softly, her voice carrying through the stillness. "This is the future. Not destruction, but life." John's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the vision of the child. It was beautiful, breathtaking, and yet it filled him with a deep, aching sorrow, because he knew that this was only a glimpse. The child wasn't real, at least not yet. It was a possibility, a potential, but it wasn't guaranteed. The light began to fade, and the figure slowly dissolved, leaving only the two of them standing in the clearing. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the weight of what had just happened. Relic was the first to speak. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. "Some trick? Some illusion?" "It's not a trick," Alicia said quietly. "It's the truth. The bond between us is not a threat, Relic. It is a gift that can bring life, not destruction." Relic's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. "You're wrong," he spat. This abomination is not the future of Velastra." John stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with quiet determination. "You saw it with your own eyes, Relic. That's what the bond will create. A child born of both our worlds. A child who can unite us, if you let it." Relic's hands clenched into fists, his face twisted with fury. "No," he shouted, his voice echoing through the clearing. "I will not allow this. The bond must be severed, before it's too late." Before anyone could react, Relic lunged forward, a knife glinting in his hand. John barely had time to process what was happening before the Elder was upon him, the blade flashing toward him. But Alicia was faster. With a movement so swift it seemed almost unnatural, Alicia stepped between them, her hands raised. A pulse of energy radiated from her, a shockwave of pure, glowing light that sent Relic staggering back. The knife flew from his hand, clattering to the ground as he stumbled, his eyes wide with shock. John stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest as he stared at Alicia. Her eyes were glowing with the light of the bond, her expression calm but fierce. She wasn't just defending herself, she was defending the future. Relic fell to his knees, his face pale and trembling. The other villagers, who had watched the entire scene unfold in stunned silence, slowly began to move. One by one, they stepped forward, their eyes fixed on Alicia and John. There was no anger in their gazes now, no fear. Only wonder. Alicia turned to face them, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "The bond is not something to fear," she said softly. "It is a source of life, of unity. Our child will not bring destruction. It will bring hope." The villagers exchanged glances, their expressions uncertain but softened. Slowly, hesitantly, they began to nod. The tension in the air seemed to dissolve, replaced by a quiet, cautious acceptance. John let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his heart still racing. They had done it. They had shown the villagers the truth, and now, finally, they had a chance to build a future together. Relic, still on his knees, looked up at them with a mixture of defeat and fear. "You don't understand," he whispered, his voice broken. "The prophecy. It speaks of great change, great upheaval." "Yes," Alicia said softly. "Change is coming, but it doesn't have to be the end. It can be the beginning of something new." Relic's shoulders slumped, and he said nothing more. The fight had gone out of him. John turned to Alicia, his chest tight with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Is it over?" he asked quietly. Alicia smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "No," she said, "it's just beginning." The days that followed were quiet but filled with a sense of cautious hope. The village, once divided, slowly began to come together, united by the vision they had seen. The bond between John and Alicia, once feared, was now seen as a symbol of the future, a future that, while uncertain, was filled with possibility. Relic had retreated to the shadows, his influence waning as the villagers turned their attention to the future rather than the past. He still harbored doubts, still clung to the old ways, but his power over the village had been broken. And for now, that was enough. John and Elysia spent their days preparing for the future, strengthening the bond between them, learning more about each other's worlds. And though the path ahead was still filled with challenges, they faced it together, their hearts united by the bond that had brought them together. One evening, as they sat together by the edge of the forest, watching the twin moons rise in the sky, John turned to Elysia, his voice quiet but filled with emotion. "What happens now?" he asked. Elysia smiled, her eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. "Now," she said, "we build the future, one step at a time." John nodded, his heart filled with a quiet sense of peace. For the first time since the crash, he felt a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. He wasn't just a stranger on an alien world anymore. He was part of something greater, something that had the power to change, not just Velastra, but the course of his own life. And as he looked at Elysia, at the woman who had saved him, the woman who had become his partner, his heart swelled with a deep, abiding love. The bond between them wasn't just a connection of fate. It was a choice they had made together, and one they would continue to make every day. The forest was still, bathed in the soft glow of the twin moons hanging high in the night sky. A delicate mist curled around the base of the trees, shimmering faintly in the pale light. John and Elysia had retreated deep into the heart of Velastra's vast wilderness, seeking refuge from the storm that now raged in the village behind them. The days since their narrow escape had been tense, filled with whispered conversations and long silences as they planned their next move, always aware that Ralik's forces might find them at any moment. But now, under the calm and quiet of the stars, there was a different kind of tension in the air, one that had been building between them for days, but which neither of them had yet acknowledged aloud. John sat by the small fire they had built, its flickering light casting long shadows over the clearing. Elysia was beside him, her face illuminated by the gentle glow of the flames. They had shared many quiet moments like this over the past few days, finding comfort in each other's presence, but tonight felt different. The bond between them was no longer just a quiet hum at the back of his mind. It was alive, pulsing with an intensity that John couldn't ignore. He had spent days wrestling with his thoughts, trying to make sense of everything that had happened since his crash landing on Velastra. The fight with Ralik's followers had been the culmination of a growing tension he hadn't fully understood, until now. It wasn't just about survival anymore, or even about the bond that had tied him to Elysia. It was about something deeper, a future he hadn't dared to envision until now. As he stared into the flames, John felt a weight settle on his chest, a weight he knew he needed to release. His hands, resting on his knees, tightened into fists as he tried to find the words. He had never been good at opening up, never been good at making himself vulnerable. But with Elysia, it was different. She saw him. She had always seen him. He looked over at her, his eyes tracing the soft, elegant lines of her face, the delicate patterns of light that danced across her skin. She was breathtaking, not just in her beauty, but in her strength, her quiet resilience. She had saved his life in more ways than one, and now he knew that he wanted to be more than just a man who had stumbled into her world by accident. He wanted to build a life with her. A future. "Elysia," he said softly, his voice breaking the stillness of the night. She turned to him, her violet eyes luminous in the firelight. "Yes." John swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. The moment he had been both dreading and anticipating. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "about everything that's happened. About us, about the bond." Elysia's gaze softened and she nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I came here by accident," John said, his words slow and deliberate. "I didn't ask for any of this, but I've realized that the bond between us, it wasn't a mistake, it wasn't just chance. It was meant to happen." Elysia's eyes searched his face, her expression unreadable. "What are you saying, John?" He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I'm saying that I want to honor the bond. All of it. I want to do this sacred thing." For a moment there was silence. Elysia stared at him, her eyes wide with surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to say the words aloud. The bond between them hummed with anticipation, filling the space with an almost tangible energy. "You want to have the child," Elysia said, her voice barely above a whisper. as if she needed to hear the words spoken aloud to believe them. John nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. Yes, he said, his voice firm. I want to have the child. I want to build a life here with you. I don't know what the future holds, and I don't know what this prophecy means, but I do know that I don't want to live in fear of it anymore. I want to embrace it. I want to embrace us. Alicia's eyes shimmered with emotion, her breath catching in her throat. For a long moment she didn't speak, her gaze locked on his, as if she were trying to process the enormity of what he had just said. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, soft and full of warmth, the kind of smile that made John feel as though the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. John, she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Are you sure? He reached out, taking her hand in his, the warmth of her skin grounding him. I've never been more sure of anything, he said, his voice steady and clear. I love you, Alicia. I don't know when it happened, but I do. And I want to share this life with you. I want to create something beautiful, something that will last. Alicia's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy. She squeezed his hand tightly, her breath trembling with emotion. I love you too, she whispered, her voice thick with feeling. I didn't think you would ever want this. I thought you would always long for your home, for Earth. John shook his head, his gaze never leaving hers. You are my home now. This planet, this bond, you. This is where I belong. The air between them was thick with emotion, the bond thrumming with an intensity that John had never felt before. The connection between them, once fragile and uncertain, had solidified into something unbreakable, something that transcended words or promises. Without hesitation, John leaned forward and kissed her. The kiss was slow, deep, filled with all the emotions they had been holding back for so long. It wasn't the tentative kiss they had shared before, back in the quiet moments of their blossoming relationship. This was different. This was a kiss born of certainty, of commitment. It was a promise unspoken but understood that they would face whatever came next together, as one. Alicia responded in kind, her arms wrapping around him as she pressed herself closer. The warmth of her body, the softness of her skin, ignited something inside him, a deep, primal desire that had been simmering just below the surface for days, weeks, maybe even longer. He could feel the bond pulsing between them, growing stronger with each passing second, until it felt like the very air around them was charged with energy. They moved together slowly at first, their touches gentle but filled with unspoken urgency. Alicia's fingers traced the lines of his face, his jaw, his neck, as if memorizing every detail of him. John's hand slid down her back, feeling the smoothness of her skin beneath his fingertips, the delicate patterns of light that danced along her body like the stars themselves. The world around them seemed to fall away, the trees, the fire, the distant sounds of the forest fading into nothingness. All that remained was the two of them, their bodies pressed together, their breaths mingling in the cool night air. John, Alicia whispered against his lips, her voice soft but filled with need. I want this. I want you. John's heart surged with emotion, his breath catching in his throat. He pulled her closer, his lips brushing against her ear as he whispered, Then let's make it real. Let's make this bond unbreakable. And with that, the last of the barriers between them fell. The night passed in a blur of warmth and light, of whispered words and shared breaths. Their bodies moved together in perfect harmony, the bond between them pulsing with a quiet, steady rhythm that guided them forward. It was as if the universe itself had aligned, drawing them together in a way that transcended anything either of them had ever known. When the morning finally came, the first rays of the twin suns casting a soft, golden light over the clearing, John awoke to find Alicia lying beside him, her head resting on his chest, her breath slow and even. The bond between them was still there, stronger than ever, a constant, reassuring presence that filled him with a deep sense of peace. He looked down at her, his heart swelling with love as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. She stirred slightly, her violet eyes fluttering open, as she looked up at him with a sleepy smile. Good morning, she whispered, her voice filled with warmth. Good morning, John replied, his hand gently stroking her hair. How do you feel? Alicia smiled, her eyes shining with contentment. I feel complete, as if everything is finally as it should be. John nodded, his own heart echoing her sentiment. Me too. For a long time they lay there together in the quiet of the morning, the world around them slowly coming to life as the sun rose higher in the sky. The storm that had once raged in their lives, the uncertainty and fear that had threatened to tear them apart, had passed. Now, there was only the calm after the storm, a quiet sense of clarity and purpose. "We've made a choice," John said softly, his fingers tracing the delicate lines of her arm. "A choice to build something together. No matter what happens, no matter what the prophecy says, we'll face it together." Elysia nodded, her gaze filled with love and determination. Yes, together. They both knew that the challenges weren't over. Rallick and his followers were still out there, still determined to sever the bond and prevent the prophecy from coming true. But now John and Elysia were no longer just bound by destiny, they were bound by love. And that, John knew, was stronger than any prophecy, stronger than any fear. As they rose from their bed of leaves and moss, hand in hand, the warmth of the sun's bathing them in light, John felt a quiet certainty settle over him. Their journey was just beginning. And whatever came next, they were ready. Epilogue. The days that followed were filled with both joy and trepidation. John and Elysia returned to the village, but things had changed. Rallick and his followers were still a looming presence, their belief that the bond represented a danger to Velastra unshaken. But word of the child of the new life that would soon come into being spread quickly among the villagers, and with it came a sense of hope. There were those who believed that the prophecy was not one of destruction, but of renewal, that the child born of two worlds would not bring ruin, but a new dawn, a merging of human resilience and Velastran harmony. Slowly, cautiously, the village began to divide not out of fear, but out of possibility. John and Elysia stood at the center of it all, their bond now unbreakable, their future uncertain but filled with promise. And deep within the forest, beneath the shimmering leaves and glowing flowers, the child they would one day bring into the world awaited its time, its birth destined to change both their lives and the fate of Velastra forever.